My wife, Lay, sat locked in the kitchen, perched on a chair, looking just as defeated as I felt. I was ashamed that I had to resort to locking her up. She had tried to run away, and I had overreacted. The keys were hidden, out of reach, and I had come to terms with this difficult decision for now. Her stunning makeup was ruined, streaked with tears, and a stain of vomit marred the left side of her little black dress. As I stood by the sink, the smell of partially digested wine mixed with bile filled the air, turning my stomach. When Lay realized I was home early, she was so shocked and distraught that she bolted for the bathroom, desperate to throw up. She didn't handle it well at all. Earlier that day, she had told me she was leaving for a trade show in Atlanta. She was supposed to be gone until late Sunday evening, having kissed me goodbye at 7 a.m. before embarking on a 4-hour drive. But my day took an unexpected turn. Mid-morning, a semi-trailer trying to make a sharp turn slammed into an electrical pole outside my gun shop, knocking it over. The impact caused a power outage in our area, and since my cinder block shop had no windows, it quickly became stuffy and hot. My employees were getting restless, joking but only half kidding about hazard pay while we waited for the electrician crew from the co-op. That's when I received a cheerful call from Lay. "Hi, darling. I made it to Atlanta. I'm staying in the same hotel as last time, sharing a room with one of the girls. Right now, I'm at the convention center setting up our booth. We open at 2 o'clock this afternoon, so don't call me until later. I'll call you every evening when I have some free time. Bye, dear." Just a few minutes after hanging up, a crew from the electric company finally arrived. The crew chief delivered the unfortunate news: they had brought the wrong size pole, and it would take another 3 hours to restore power. I decided to close the shop and gave everyone the day off. I headed home, dreaming of a long, cool shower to wash away the heat and tension. Imagine my surprise when I walked into the bedroom and found Lay standing next to the bed, wearing the sexy lingerie I had bought her during our honeymoon. The dark red set featured a full-cup bra, garters, and a satin thong, a gift that she had only worn a couple of times in the 7 years since I had given it to her. She didn't notice me at first. She was busy pulling her tight little black dress over her head, obscuring her face. There was something off about her. She seemed unsteady on her feet. My sensitive nose picked up the scent of wine, and on the dresser behind her, I spotted an open bottle of Chardonnay and a small puddle of spilled wine, along with a glass containing a sip or two. That meant she had already downed at least 3 glasses, which was excessive for her. But the way her scent reminded me of peach pie wafting from the oven ignited a spark of excitement in me. I felt the thrill of an unforgettable evening ahead. However, that exhilaration vanished the moment I realized Lay should have been in Atlanta, preparing for a trade show, not here, getting ready for someone else. When her dress slid down and her eyes finally met mine, the shock on her face was something I would never forget. "Sorry," she managed to say, but the words were quickly swallowed by a violent cough as she dashed toward the bathroom. As I watched her vomit most of that bottle of Chardonnay along with her lunch, the fantasy of a romantic evening crumbled into dust. Still, I couldn't tear my eyes away from her graceful silhouette in that tight dress, even as she retched. I had to admit, her figure was stunning. I could only imagine how Beau and Teague must have found her just as attractive. Teague, the company's frostbitten marketing director, had a history of inappropriate behavior. A few years back, he had driven a van full of women, dancers he referred to as booth candy, to an exhibition. When HR in the legal department caught wind of it, it sent shockwaves through the company, much like a meltdown in a video game. The owner, Mr. Cope, was embarrassingly lenient with Teague, but even he couldn't overlook such a blatant violation. Now, Teague was forced to recruit from the available office staff, asking Lay and a few other slender, pretty women to work the exhibition stand. They agreed to call themselves volunteers while secretly pocketing $1,000 a day, tax-free cash. For Lay, an accountant, it was a tempting offer, especially considering the irony: she had to work nearly a month at her regular job to make the same amount she could earn in just one weekend at the exhibition. I hated the fact that Lei had to work at all, but we needed her salary to make ends meet. To complicate matters, my father had been a wealthy man, but he despised trust funds. When he passed away last year, he made it clear he wanted his children to understand the value of hard work. He had set up a trust that required us to earn our keep, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a life filled with contradictions. As I stood there, watching Lei's beautiful silhouette amidst the chaos, I knew this was just the beginning of a storm that would change everything. I had to confront her, confront the life we had built, and question whether the love we once had could survive such betrayal. The future felt uncertain, but I was determined to get to the bottom of this. My heart ached, but one thing was clear: I was not going to let this go without a fight. His father had always insisted that each of his children should open their own business and rely solely on what they earned until they turned 30. Only then were they entitled to their share of the family trust. My older brother and sister, both a few years ahead of me, eagerly took on this challenge, assuring me that the experience was invaluable. They vowed to continue this tradition with their own children. As the youngest of my father's brood, I still had 2 years to go. La and I lived on her modest salary and what I could bring in from my gun store. I know the phrase "my gun store" sounds promising, but in rural Georgia, it was more of a hobby than a thriving enterprise. The store belonged to my Uncle Kevin, who loved to hunt and used it as a way to connect with the best hunters in the state. When Uncle Kevin suffered a stroke a couple of months before I graduated from Georgia Tech, it became my responsibility. Instead of starting a business from scratch like my siblings, my father gave me the chance to take over the store. That was both a blessing and a curse. The upside was that I didn't have to launch a new venture during an economic downturn, when credit was nearly impossible to obtain. The downside? The growth potential was severely limited. By the time La had her episode on our bathroom floor, I had owned the store for 7 years and had become an expert in limited growth potential. I took immense pride in the fact that none of my 5 employees had missed a paycheck, despite the struggles of the economy and the unpredictable fallout from COVID-19. I was confident that with some capital improvements, I could turn the store into a more profitable business, but I couldn't qualify for a loan. My collateral wasn't enough to offset the risk, and lending institutions were extremely hesitant to finance firearm sales. La had managed to get a job at Everpart, the only company in the area large enough to require a full-time accountant. Unfortunately, she was paid a pittance for her qualifications. Between her meager salary and what I earned from the store, we barely scraped by. In truth, we were doing better than many in our community, and we had no real complaints. However, when life threw curveballs at us, like the water heater leaking or the starter in my pickup failing, we tightened our belts and made do with less, just like everyone else. Belle's cash payments from shows had significantly improved our quality of life. So, when Bowden Teague asked her to work at an exhibition, she never turned him down. It took La and me just 10 minutes to clean up her vomit. We worked in silence, both too consumed by our thoughts to speak. La didn't want to explain what she had been doing at home, dressing for another man, and I didn't trust myself to keep my temper in check. I'm usually slow to anger, but on the rare occasions when I do lose my temper, it can get ugly. Today was shaping up to be one of those days. I had learned over the years that it's far easier to avoid losing your temper in the first place than it is to rein it in afterward. I'd been working on this for a while, but as I looked at the mess we had just cleaned, I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. Once we were done, I wanted to go into the living room and calmly discuss everything, but La insisted she had to leave, or she would be late. "Where are you going?" I pressed, but she simply shut her mouth and jutted her jaw. She could be infuriatingly stubborn. After 15 minutes of increasingly hostile questions, none of which she answered, she claimed she needed to use the bathroom. 2 minutes later, I caught her trying to sneak out to the garage, grabbing a fresh dress from a hanger. She was almost out the door when I noticed her. That's when I snapped. After a few minutes of argument, I managed to stop her and sit her down in a chair. My throat was hoarse from shouting, but the silver lining was that I finally had her full attention. She saw my anger and knew she was in for it. Although my rage never turned violent, Lo was clearly frightened. She didn't know that my anger was never aimed at her, and it scared the living daylights out of her. I made her feel like a complete idiot for trying to sneak out, and I hated that about myself. But sitting there, facing me, she realized she wasn't going anywhere until we talked. "So, where were you going?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. "And it better not be some crummy trade show in Atlanta." That's when she burst into tears. "Of all people, you chose Bowen Teague?" I asked, my incredulity spilling over. "That man is a pig, and you absolutely despise him." "Yes, I hate him. I can't stand him," she admitted, her voice muffled by tears. I knew it was true. Lee's accounting responsibilities fell under Teague's marketing department, and she had to communicate with him weekly. Although he was decent to her, she loathed the way he treated the other women in the office. I remembered how she practically danced with joy when one of the heads of the inventory department reported his harassment to human resources. This wasn't the first accusation against Teague. Mr. Cope had placed him on probation after learning of the allegations. He should have been fired, but Mr. Cope thought Teague was a marketing genius. Despite keeping his job, it was the last straw for his wife. Upon learning of the situation, she left him, taking their 2 small children with her. "If you can't stand him, why the hell did you go to his house?" I pressed, the frustration boiling over. "I wasn't going to his house. I was going to a hotel," she snapped back, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Just answer the damn question." I lost the bet money." "Bet? What bet?" "I bet him that Georgia would beat Clemson last week. Clemson not only won, but they beat the spread by more than 2 touchdowns. I could feel my anger simmering down as I explained. This wasn't a surprise, either. Georgia is in a rebuilding phase. They lost 5 games and were a total disaster compared to Clemson. But I thought maybe, just maybe, they could pull off a miracle," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Finally, the story started to make sense. La had 4 older brothers, and I knew how they were. They would never let a bet go unchallenged. She was probably dragged into it, whether she wanted to be or not. In that moment of clarity, my anger began to fade, and I realized the importance of communication. As frustrating as it was to confront her about Teague, we had to work through our problems together. And as much as I wanted to keep my temper in check, I also wanted to ensure that she knew I was here for her, no matter what mistakes she had made. 5 siblings were born within a single year, each of them vying for attention and approval in their own unique ways. Among them was Violet, but she was anything but a delicate flower. Growing up with 4 older brothers turned her into the fiercest, most hyper-competitive trash talker I had ever encountered. With a quick wit and a sharp tongue, she could tear someone down just as easily as she could lift them up. Although her full name was Violet, everyone called her Letty. The nickname suited her. She was a force of nature, someone who could grab a guy's face in the blink of an eye. But there was another side to her. The more she despised someone, the nastier her remarks became. This only fueled her reputation as a relentless competitor. A proud graduate of the University of Georgia, Letty never missed a chance to flaunt her loyalty to her beloved Bulldogs. Her passion for the team was intense, and she often placed bets that were far too risky for someone with only a casual interest in sports. What exactly were the stakes? I asked, intrigued by her boldness. She sniffled before replying, a trip to the British Virgin Islands. 10 days at an all-inclusive resort, plus a dinner cruise on a sailboat. Bowden takes his wife and kids there every year. I would get their tickets in February, just for you and me. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. It was a tempting offer, one that I could hardly refuse. That's quite a wager, especially for us. But what happens if he wins? I probed, knowing that these bets often had a hidden cost. If he wins, she paused, her voice barely above a whisper, I would have to be at his disposal for the whole week. His disposal? I echoed, my mind racing. I knew what that meant, but I wanted her to say it outright. Andy, it means I have to do whatever he wants. You know, in the bedroom. Her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. I took 3 deep breaths, trying to keep my composure. Letty, don't you think you should have started with that? My tone was softer than I felt, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. As she looked away, I pressed on, you mentioned original bets earlier. What does that mean? She hesitated, her discomfort palpable. It was clear she didn't want to answer. But I was losing control, the frustration building inside me like a pressure cooker about to explode. Lay, please, just tell me. Finally, she blurted out, we took the double or nothing route. If I win, he still provides first-class travel for $2,000 and $2,000 in cash. But if he wins, I have to do everything I just mentioned, and I have to agree to take various prohibited substances every day for his sake. I felt my heart drop. Prohibited substances? Are you joking? She lowered her gaze. He teases that I'm Miss Goody-Goody and wants to see me relaxed and with my hair down. Letty, this isn't a game, I exclaimed, my voice rising. The heaviest illicit substance you've ever taken is a margarita on the rocks, and even that's rare. Andy, I'm ashamed, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Who won the original bet that led you to this double or nothing game? I asked, forcing myself to remain calm. I did, she admitted, her voice trembling. I won a trip to the BVI, and then I doubled down to get more airfare and spending money. Let me get this straight, you picked the Bulldogs, who are in a slump this year, and put your virtue on the line? I shook my head in disbelief. Do you even realize the mess you've created? After a moment of silence, I stepped outside onto the terrace, the cool evening air washing over me. I needed to think. Letty had gambled away her loyalty, and it felt like a betrayal I couldn't easily overlook. Returning to the living room, I said firmly, you're not going anywhere. The bet is cancelled. Your body belongs to me, and mine belongs to you. You can't bet on something that doesn't belong to you. She looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and confusion. How many times have you argued about these bets, Letty? 24 times in the past 2 years, she replied, her voice steady but regretful. 24 times. And all based on teams from the top 20 winning against those at the bottom? Bowden has always chosen the teams from the basement until last week's bet. And then you lost the 25th bet, the one that could cost you everything. Letty opened her mouth to argue, but I pressed on. Did you ever think you were being set up? You were fooled, Letty. Every team he bet on was practically guaranteed to lose. Her face turned pale as she absorbed the reality of the situation. I didn't realize. What were the bets in the previous 24? I pressed, determined to get to the bottom of this. The standard bet was a Target gift card. First it was for $20, and then the last 6 or 7 times, it was $100. Those damn Target cards almost ruined our marriage, I muttered, frustration creeping into my voice. I poured the rest of my beer down the sink and grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the cabinet. I poured myself a drink, letting the amber liquid cool with a couple of ice cubes. After a moment, I turned back to her. After 24 small bets, he suddenly raises the stakes to 10 days at an all-inclusive Caribbean resort? Didn't you see that coming? Her eyes widened in realization. I didn't think of it that way. Bowden said after his wife left him he didn't want to waste the money he'd already paid for their annual trip. So he used you as a pawn in his game. Doesn't that sound like a setup? Letty's expression shifted as the realization hit her. I didn't see it that way. And what about the monetary cost of this vacation? What if his wife claims half the cost in their divorce proceedings? I pressed. Her silence spoke volumes. Have you ever seen the tickets or booking confirmation? How do you know he even booked the trip? As the weight of my questions sank in, I saw the color drain from her face. It was clear she was beginning to grasp the extent of Bowden's manipulation. She was caught in a web of her own making, and I could only hope she would find her way back before it was too late. It was time to wrap this up, the way my father would have done it. Letty, I said, my voice steady, have you thought about what this weekend would actually look like if you agreed to let him do whatever he wanted with you? The expression on her face shifted, confusion mixing with horror. It was clear she hadn't fully considered the implications. She seemed to imagine it like one of those passionate love stories she adored, not thinking about the kind of things someone like Teet could do. The terms are whatever he wants, right? I pressed. Yes, Andy, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Is there any type of intimacy that you refuse to engage in? I watched as a blush crept across her cheeks, and she lowered her gaze to the floor, but she still answered. You know what it is, she murmured, shame etching her features. And the bet you made was that you couldn't deny him what you normally deny me. What if Bowden wants to do this all weekend? What if he wants to keep you doing just that 4 hours? Letty looked absolutely disgusted, her expression morphing into horror. A shudder ran through her body, and tears began to flow. You're being cruel, she whispered, her voice cracking. Resign yourself, dear. There's one more thing, I continued, my tone firm. You're not taking birth control. We are very careful about what we do and when we do it. What if Bowden decides he wants you to give birth to his child? Letty suddenly turned pale and began to vomit. I rushed to grab the kitchen trash can, holding it closed as she leaned over, heaving but producing nothing. The can was empty, just like the hope I once had. From the look on her face, I realized she finally grasped the gravity of the situation with complete clarity. What a fool I am, Andy, she cried, her voice laced with despair. I didn't want this. It never occurred to me that he would go this far. I was so confident I would win, I had already planned what I would take with me. I shouldn't have made that bet. When I lost, I should have told you. I should have known better. What was I thinking? Her sobs filled the room, and I sighed, feeling a heavy weariness settle over me. It was hard to reconcile the woman I loved with the choices she had made. Letty was a certified public accountant, graduating with honors from Georgia. I often heard her colleagues affectionately refer to her as the enchantress for her uncanny ability to make profits disappear from the books. But beneath that sharp intellect lay a sheltered upbringing. The youngest and only daughter in a family of 7, her father was a pastor in a small church, and her protective, muscular brothers had kept her fiercely guarded. They scared off anyone who didn't treat Letty with the utmost respect. So, before she engaged with me, her life had been quiet and secluded, making it all the more shocking that she fell for this trap. Her naivety was a glaring weakness. She had never been exposed to the darker sides of human nature, which made it easy for someone like T to manipulate her. And this was her first brush with high-stakes gambling. We both knew she craved thrills. Ever since we started dating, I had kept her safe from danger, but now, without me around, she had gotten swept up in the excitement. As she sat in that chair, her face streaked with tears and snot, I approached her with a damp kitchen towel, hoping to comfort her. Instead, my gesture only seemed to intensify her sobs. Letty, I need you to listen to me right now, I said, hitting the table to draw her attention. Focus, please. She took a shaky breath and managed to regain some composure. This is instant divorce, no lies, no exaggerations. Don't pass go, don't collect $200. Get a divorce right away. Understand? Do you know how close I am to hitting the eject lever right now? Especially after I caught you and you still tried to sneak away. She nodded, her mouth a tight line, desperately holding back tears. I love you with all my heart, and I don't want to divorce you. But you need to explain this mess to me. When she didn't answer immediately, frustration bubbled inside me, and I began bombarding her with questions. Are you tired of me? Did I disappoint you? Are you unhappy with me? How could you do this to us? The pain seeped into my voice, and I cursed myself for letting self-pity creep in. I had been raised never to indulge in it, but now it felt inescapable. To my surprise, my question seemed to calm her down. No, honey, it's not you at all, she said fiercely. You are the best man I've ever met. I'm completely satisfied with you, Andy. I want to be married to you. You're the man I need, only you. I studied her face closely, searching for any hint of deception, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. It made everything even more bewildering. This is terrible, I said slowly. Of course, I hope you're telling the truth. But you'll have to do a lot of work to make things right. Before we got engaged, I made my position on infidelity clear, just me and no one else. As soon as you do something with someone else, it's over between us. You understand this, right? I feel the same way, she began, but my anger flared up again. Whoa, no. Don't you dare say that. Have I ever given you any reason to doubt my loyalty? She shook her head, and I could see the shame flooding her face. This incident was a major failure on your part, I continued, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. There have never been such failures on my part. You and I are not morally equal. I've never taken steps toward infidelity. But you. If I had come home half an hour later, you'd be well on your way to being Teed's toy. If that had happened, divorce would have been inevitable. I never put you in the position I'm in now. I paused, forcing myself to breathe and calm the storm brewing inside me. My thoughts were spiraling, threatening to overwhelm me with rage. Did anyone witness your bet? I asked, striving for some semblance of control. Was anyone else involved in the conversation about this? Letty shook her head, and I felt a sliver of relief. Then the only one who actually knows that you're going back on your word is him. Everyone else is oblivious. With those words, I felt the weight of the world resting squarely on my shoulders. It was time to figure out how to move forward, but I wasn't sure how to begin. No one would believe him if he told them the truth. They'd either think he was lying or exaggerating. Even if they knew what had really happened, it wouldn't change anything. Nobody expects you to put yourself through what he was suggesting. If saying no makes you feel guilty, then you'll have to live with that guilt. It's better to be a happily married word breaker, dealing with the shame, than to be a miserable divorcee living with 10 times that shame. She bit back a sob and nodded in agreement, fully on board with my perspective. How do you communicate with Teague? I asked, my curiosity piqued. How did you arrange this weekend? We talked in the office. He wanted to text me on my mobile, but I didn't want that, so I blocked him, she explained. Yesterday, he gave me a phone, but I never used it. Honestly, where is he? I picked up her purse from the floor, sifting through its contents until I found a cheap prepaid phone. Is this his? I asked, holding it up. She nodded, and I started to sift through the messages. There was one outgoing SMS with just the word test, but several incoming messages had come through in the last hour. Teague wanted to know why she had been gone for so long. Is there anything else you need to tell me that we haven't already covered? I pressed. If I find out later that you're hiding something, it's over between us. You know that, right? She shook her head. This is all I know. You know everything. Then it's okay, I said, my tone softening. Can I trust you now? Are you going to try to deceive me again or have an impulsive change of heart at the last second? With a surprising bitterness, she replied, I'm not going anywhere, Andy. You are my man. I'll do whatever you say. With a silent prayer, I unlocked the door. As she rushed toward me, trying to smother me with kisses, I felt a wave of anger. The remnants of her recent emotional breakdown, the smell of vomit still lingering, made me want to pull away. However, her determination was convincing. After a minute of holding my breath, I gently pushed her away. "Go upstairs, shower, and brush your teeth," I instructed firmly. "No contact with Teague for any reason. We need to prepare." She nodded, agreeing. As she passed by, I reached out and touched her arm to stop her. "By the way, I like that set of underwear on you. Do me a favor, snap a selfie in front of the bathroom mirror with this set, will you? Just for me?" She smiled and nodded enthusiastically before heading upstairs. While she showered and got ready, I made my way to Lonnie's barbecue, just half a mile from the house. I picked up a couple of plates of our favorite meal, fried chicken and pork, along with a few sides. It was early for dinner, but I felt like food would help ease the tension as I waited. While I was munching on the delicious food, my phone buzzed with a text from Letty. She had sent a selfie, her hair pulled back into a ponytail and her face perfectly made up, just the way I liked it. The photo took my breath away, but the thought of how close we had come to disaster that evening filled me with barely contained rage. I wanted my pound of flesh from Teague, but I had to figure out how to get it without ending up behind bars. Then it struck me, if I involved Letty's brothers in this, I likely wouldn't have to do anything. While we ate, I turned to Letty and said, "I know you're sensitive to your brothers teasing you, but I'll do my best to keep this little incident between us. Neither my family nor yours should know about this." Her expression showed deep gratitude, but we both understood that something had to be done about Teague. "What he did was serious predation," I continued. "If we don't act, he'll start hunting for someone else, someone who doesn't have our resources, someone who can't fight back. We have to be responsible adults in this situation." Letty nodded, her determination clear. "I want him to face justice for what he did." "What does justice mean to you?" I asked, curious about her thoughts. "I don't think he broke any laws with what he did to you, Letty. What he did to manipulate you into sleeping with him was despicable, but it wasn't illegal." She fell silent, contemplating my words. After a moment, I added, "We do have something to work with, though. He's currently holed up in a hotel room with illegal substances. That's illegal, and it could be enough to get him arrested. To do something like this, we'll need to involve either VK or Little Joe," I suggested. She groaned at the mention of Little Joe. "I don't want to go that route." "Well, Little Joe doesn't hesitate to break the rules, and VK is more likely to follow the law. I'd rather go with VK, he's more discreet. Plus, he's been asking to borrow Pa's vintage speedboat for a while now, so I can use that to secure his silence." "But Little Joe gets results," Letty countered. "He'll make sure Bowden is stopped, no matter the cost." "Let's take a vote," I said. "You decide." After a moment of deliberation, Letty summoned her courage and said, "Better to go with VK. I also don't trust Little Joe to keep his mouth shut." I picked up my phone and called VK, who answered on the first ring. "Andy. How are you and my beautiful sister doing?" "Not very good, VK," I replied, my voice serious. "Are you on duty today?" "No," he answered. "I need a big favor, and I will be greatly indebted to you for this," I said, feeling a weight on my shoulders. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's department SUV pulled into our driveway. VK was Letty's older brother and the scariest of the four. As the chief deputy sheriff in the county, he carried a lot of responsibility. In our state, sheriffs are often politicians who may not have actual law enforcement experience, but the chief deputy sheriff is the top professional in law enforcement. He knows how to get things done. I briefed VK on what had happened to Letty and Bowden, detailing everything to save her from humiliation. At first, he found the situation amusing, but his demeanor quickly shifted as he grasped the seriousness of what had happened. "Bowden will pay for this," VK said, his voice low and intense. "Trust me." Sister's gullibility. "Did you really bet double or nothing on Georgia to beat Clemson this year?" I exclaimed, frustration bubbling over. Damn it, that's just stupid. VK's cheerful demeanor shifted as I recounted the situation involving illegal substances. The more I talked, the angrier he became. When VK gets angry, he doesn't lose his cool like I do. Instead, his lips press tightly together, and his eyes shine with an unsettling intensity. That's what makes him so intimidating. Listen, I said, trying to stay focused. This is all happening in room 223 at the garden. He has to have those illegal substances with him. Do you think we can search his room under some pretense? Maybe use a K9 unit to track him down? VK nodded, his mind working. I've got a few ideas. Let me make a couple of calls. He headed out to his SUV, and I waited, tapping my foot anxiously. When he returned, he wore a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Good news. An anonymous caller just reported a guy in room 223 buying illegal substances from a dealer. If the door is open when my guys arrive, we'll have everything we need for a legal search. Letty, who had been listening intently, asked, "Can't you just pretend to be there and ask him to leave the door open?" Bowden Teague has been calling the hotline every few minutes, leaving voicemails, I said, handing Letty my phone. Text him. Tell him you're in the parking lot but nervous about being seen in the lobby. Ask him to leave the door open for you. Letty quickly typed a message and sent it. Teague didn't respond to her request. Instead, he replied, "Where have you been?" Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, but I quickly warned her, "Don't answer. If you start talking to him, he'll figure us out. Just reply that I showed up unexpectedly and it took you a while to get away." Teague texted back, "If you want the door open, you must be interested in me." Letty looked at me, uncertain. What should I do? An idea sparked in my mind. I pulled up a selfie of Lay in the bathroom mirror, wearing a revealing set of lingerie. I carefully cropped it to show just enough, from the top of her bra to the lace of her stockings, and sent it to Letty's phone via Bluetooth. "Now, send this to him," I instructed. The sultry close-up was risque but still ambiguous enough to keep him guessing. It was the kind of photo that would drive a guy wild. Almost immediately, Bowden's reaction came through. "Best weekend ever." He texted back. A moment later, he sent a picture of his hotel room door wide open. VK sprang into action, making a phone call to get things moving. Then, he settled down beside me in the living room. I seized the opportunity to send Letty upstairs under some pretense. Once she was gone, I turned to VK. "Look, I know I owe you big time for this, but please be gentle with Letty. She's smart but incredibly naive. She's been fooled before, and I don't want this to hurt her." VK chuckled softly. "You don't owe me anything, Andy. You're just looking out for my sister. I expected that from you. I wouldn't have let you date her otherwise. But I appreciate it, and what you've asked me to do is literally my job. Catching Teague is the least I can do. Just keep it between us," I added. "You know how little Joe can be. If he finds out about Letty, the whole neighborhood will know by noon." VK nodded, his expression serious. "Consider me discreet. I'll handle it." I took a breath, relieved. "Thanks. And I know you want to borrow the boat. My dad's vintage ski boat will work for one occasion, maybe in June after school ends. You can take the kids on a weekday, and I'll cover the gas." We shook hands, sealing the deal just as Letty came back down to see her brother. "I really want kids," Letty confessed, a hopeful glint in her eye. We had agreed to wait until we had access to the trust before diving into parenthood. My sister was excited about the possibility, but VK was more reserved, urging us to hold off. Still, Letty enjoyed playing the role of aunt, doting on her many nephews. She grilled VK about what was happening with his kids, especially her favorites, Ann and Rascal. Eventually, VK took a call. He laughed in places but didn't reveal anything too specific. After a couple of minutes, he said, "Okay, Great job, Darnell. Thank Carlos for me too. Then he turned to us. Bowden Teague was arrested just a few minutes ago at the Garden. He's facing charges for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. They found a significant quantity on him, along with empty bags and scales, which definitely points to distribution. He's looking at some serious time. Letty's face paled. He shouldn't have anything to do with illegal substances. They're not just addictive, they can also cloud your judgment in so many ways. I tried my best to control my emotions as Letty rubbed my back soothingly. The probable cause for the anonymous tip wasn't very strong, VK continued, but Bowden made a critical mistake. He was smoking in his room when sheriff's deputies walked by. The door was open, so they smelled smoke and went inside. He tried to push them out, but during the scuffle, he dropped a bag of illegal substances right in front of 4 witnesses, including the hotel manager and a repairman. Letty gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What happened next? Things got ugly, VK said, his tone grim. He started acting belligerent and resisted arrest. The deputies had to subdue him. The arresting officer was Darnell Bips, you know him, right? He's a regular customer at my store. I nodded, remembering Darnell's friendly face. Letty shook her head, a frown creasing her brow. Bowden was 2 years ahead of me in school, VK said. His father was a member of the state legislature. But that means nothing now. He's facing some serious charges, and I can't help but feel sorry for his kids. The weight of what we had just uncovered settled heavily in the air, and I knew things would never be the same again. Bowden's recklessness had consequences that would ripple through all our lives, and we would have to deal with the fallout together. When Darnell started college, he was already known for being the class bully. He had left high school behind for 4 years, and during that time, he made life miserable for countless kids. However, it took him 15 long years to finally get his revenge. In a twist of fate, Darnell promised to treat my wife and me to a steak dinner as a thank you for sending him on this journey. We all shared a good laugh about it. Darnell came from a hard-working family. His father was a diesel mechanic who worked at various dealerships, depending on the repair jobs available. They were good people, and I held them in high regard. I was genuinely happy for Darnell as he took his well-deserved revenge. Le turned to me and asked, "What will happen to Bowden?" VK, our friend who was privy to all the details, replied, "Do you know Laney Wilcox? He's the district attorney, but he's relentless when it comes to drug offenses. Intent to distribute means mandatory sentencing. If I'm not mistaken, he'll make an example out of Mr. Teague." Then, he turned his gaze to Le. Darnell was able to get his hands on Teague's cell phone. "Is there anything on there that would embarrass you, texts, emails, calls, or photos?" Le shrugged. "Just a couple of photos from the last 2 years. We called each other a few times while at trade shows to discuss work schedules, and that's about it." VK's face turned serious. "I want that photo to disappear." "It's already taken care of," he assured her. "When the scene is cleared, Teague's phone will be found broken, reported as damaged during the altercation. You owe Darnell for this little favor." Darnell usually bought a couple of boxes of 9mm ammo every month, along with a pallet of 12-gauge shells by the end of summer. He kept a checking account and made regular payments throughout the year. I mentally noted that this year's payment would come at the establishment's expense. Plus, every month or so, he would come into the store looking for a good deal on a gun for his eldest son. Just a few days ago, I had traded in a Remington 870 Wingmaster in excellent condition. I planned to give Darnell a solid deal on that. "I'll take care of it," I said, leaving everything as it was. Le asked, "What if Bowden says he was in the room waiting for me?" "He won't," Bowden replied confidently. "He was arrested for possession of controlled substances. He's smart enough to know that no one will believe him. Besides, the only evidence linking you to him is your phone. His phone is broken. If he raises a fuss about it, we'll get a warrant to check his internet backups, and he'll end up burying himself." Darnell scrutinized Teague's phone, and the last text messages were primarily from his dealer. There was a trail of incriminating transactions, which made it unlikely that Teague would say anything that could draw attention to the phone. "As far as you're concerned, there's no evidence that you ever owned this phone. I'll take it, and it'll disappear." Le looked worried. "Can't the phone be traced back to this house?" VK shook his head. A determined investigator could get records from the cell phone company and triangulate the phone's location. In a large city, it might be possible to track it within half a mile. But out here in the countryside, we don't have nearly as many towers, so the search would only narrow it down to an 8-mile radius. There are 100 houses within that distance, so it's not as simple as it sounds. If all else fails, I'll be in charge of the investigation." Then VK paused, his expression turning grave. "There's one more thing you need to know. When they searched the room, they found some high-tech filming equipment. The cameras are invisible but have high resolution. One was hidden on the curtain rod, and the other was installed on the chest of drawers. The assistants wouldn't have noticed them if they hadn't been looking for them. When they entered the room, he was already involved with illegal substances and had blackmail cameras set up. I need to paint a picture for you. You've been framed. Don't worry about yourself, Le. Your husband's family is known to be wealthy. Maybe he was the target, not you." "What could Teague do to Andy?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. VK's eyes darkened. "Having incriminating material on you to blackmail her." Lee's face turned pale, and she didn't respond. I could tell she was grappling with the implications of his words. "Nothing to say?" "Fine. You barely dodged a bullet, sis," VK said, before asking to speak with Le alone. I stepped out into the hallway to give them some privacy. As I glanced back at them, I saw VK whispering to her, and soon Lee's eyes filled with tears. It was too much for me, so I turned away, unable to bear the weight of the moment. When VK finally left, I thanked him warmly, but he brushed it off as trivial. Around here, families take care of each other. Later that evening, I sat down with La and asked her what VK had told her. He said if I ever did to you what our mother did to us, I'd better pack my things and leave the district. Otherwise, he'd punish me himself and make me cry with grief. The thought of my brother's anger sent a shiver down my spine. That scares me to death, Andy. I've never seen him like that. This comment reminded me of the past, of how our mother, Loretta, had abandoned her family when La and her brothers were young. She had left their father, a respectable but poor country preacher, for a charming lawyer. My own father had owned several small car dealerships in South Georgia, and he had a staff of lawyers from the Augusta Partnership who worked for him. During their weekly meetings with my father, one of those lawyers would stop by the diner where Loretta worked as a waitress. Loretta had to take that job to help her family make ends meet. She was a beauty, and it didn't take long for the lawyer to take a liking to her. Loretta struggled in life with the weight of her circumstances. The lawyer was handsome and knew how to carry a conversation, slowly seducing her away from her family. He promised her an easy and luxurious life in the big city of Augusta, even claiming that in a year or two, her children would be able to join them. That was all it took to lure Loretta into abandoning her family, leaving her children to grapple with the aftermath of her choice. And now, that haunting history hung in the air, reminding us that the past could always resurface, threatening to tear us apart again. The decision to run away with him shattered everything. Letty's father, Roy, was left reeling by the scandal, and it cost him his position in the church. Paul, the local lawyer who had been his employee and friend, was furious. He felt a personal responsibility for what had happened, knowing that he was the one who brought the lawyer to the city in the first place. In a fit of anger, Paul fired him the very day the church deacons asked for Roy's resignation. Desperate to make things right and help Roy recover from the fallout, Paul hired him as a sales manager at his Ford and Lincoln dealership. It was a substantial pay increase compared to the meager salary of a preacher, and while it seemed like a generous move, it was also the best business decision Paul ever made. Roy was known for his honesty and respect, and under his leadership, the dealership thrived. It quickly became the cornerstone of Paul's business empire, and over the next few years, he and Roy became the best of friends. One was a tough businessman everyone feared, the other, a discredited preacher beloved by the community. Roy, however, was not a great cook. His children often joked that their father could burn water, and the thought of 5 growing kids eating frozen dinners every night weighed heavily on Ma's conscience. So, the Roy family became regular guests at Sunday dinners at our house. Ma stuck to tradition, making sure to spend time with Letty so she could learn to cook. Being the only girl, Letty missed her mother and craved that maternal care and attention. Every Sunday afternoon, Letty and Ma would spend hours in the kitchen, laughing and bonding over their shared sense of humor. I still remember the first time I realized I had fallen in love with Letty. We were sitting at our kitchen table, and I watched her carefully knead cookie dough. A dusting of flour was sprinkled across the tip of her nose, and she said something so cheerful that it sent my mother into fits of laughter, nearly knocking her off her feet. In that moment, Letty turned to me, winked, and smiled as if to say, "Isn't your mom wonderful?" My heart raced wildly in my chest, and a dizzying lightness washed over me. I was 15, and Letty was 14, but she had blossomed early, radiating a beauty that took my breath away. I can still recall that moment with perfect clarity. It was the best feeling in the world. VK, my older brother, was the first to notice my feelings for Letty. Just a few days later, he pulled me aside for a chat. At the time, VK was a towering figure, 15 centimeters taller and 36 kilograms heavier than me. "I know you're in love with Letty, Andy," he said, grinning. "It's written all over your face. My sister feels the same way, even if she tries to hide it." He leaned in closer, his voice low but earnest. "I'm offering you a deal. If you treat her with respect, I'll keep my father and brothers away from you. I'm a good judge of character, and I think you'll take care of her. Just don't disappoint me." At the time, I thought VK was being incredibly generous. Years later, I realized he would have moved mountains for my happiness. Meanwhile, our parents took it upon themselves to support Letty's family, helping them maintain dignity and respectability in the wake of the scandal. Pa and Ma stood by them when they needed it most, and VK understood the implications of this support for his family's reputation. But not everyone was so forgiving. Months after the lawyer's dismissal, Paul was still furious. He spared no expense in seeking revenge, hiring the best investigators in the state to dig up dirt on the lawyer who had persuaded Loretta to run away with him. The investigators uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence that Paul used to slowly dismantle the lawyer's life. In just 3 months, he lost several cases, a partnership, his license, a fortune, and eventually, Loretta. Paul expertly leaked information to the right people at just the right moments. When Roy learned about the lawyer's downfall, he stopped by our house. I overheard him say to Paul, "Proverbs 21:15 says the administration of justice is joy to the righteous but fear to those who do wrong. It's good to know that I have friends the Lord is using to bring about justice." Paul brushed it off, insisting that families in our community took care of one another. But a few months later, things took another dark turn. VK dropped by on my day off, his expression serious. "There was an incident at Glenville State Prison. Bowden Teague is dead," he said flatly. "What happened?" I asked, my heart racing. After Teague accepted a minimum sentence, they sent him to Glenville. In his very first week there, he was killed. It could have been any number of inmates, no one saying a word. VK continued, "The warden reached out to the sheriff, looking for anyone who might have a grudge against Teague. The sheriff mentioned rumors about Teague from years ago. Apparently, he had a fling with a young Hispanic woman who worked at a bar, got her hooked on drugs, and ruined her marriage. Word is, Her family found out he was in Glenville and paid off a notorious Central American gang to exact revenge. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you tell the sheriff?" VK chose his words carefully. "I checked everything and found nothing. Hypothetically, if I knew who this family was, I wouldn't tell the boss. If they were involved, they'd be suspected of conspiracy to commit murder, and that's a serious charge. Maybe they're not involved at all, it could just be a rumor floating around the prison yard." As the weight of his words settled in, I realized how quickly things could spiral out of control. The echoes of the past continued to haunt us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the web of consequences was far from over. But even if the rumors were true, the person who informed the family that Teague was in Glenville wasn't guilty of anything. What Teague was in prison for was common knowledge, the man simply brought it to their attention. I shared with him how I had overheard his father quoting some of P.A.'s parables. He had never heard the stories before and was genuinely surprised. I looked closely at his face to ensure he grasped the weight of what I was saying. Once I was confident he understood, I added, "It's nice to know that I have friends too." VK smiled broadly and patted me on the shoulder. "I'm glad we understand each other so well, Andy. Letty couldn't have chosen a better man." It had been a week since I caught Letty in a compromising situation, and since then, we had tried to be intimate half a dozen times. But the anger still simmered inside me, making it nearly impossible to follow through. This was a new and demoralizing experience. I had never struggled like this before. Each time the moment arrived, I felt as limp as a noodle. Letty took my lack of enthusiasm as a rejection and cried inconsolably for hours afterward, adding another layer of frustration to my already heavy heart. Not knowing how to cope, I decided to visit my doctor. After a thorough examination, he declared me physically healthy and referred me to a psychologist. The psychologist he recommended was an older hippie woman named Meadow Zor, who had her office in Mayon. I really liked her. She was down to earth, worldly, and tackled life's challenges with a refreshing sense of humor. I recounted the story of what happened, weaving in humor and irony to help ease the pain. She laughed heartily at all the points where I would find humor if someone else told me the same story. Her laugh was infectious, a full-body experience that made it impossible not to join in. For several months, Meadow worked with me twice a week to help me deal with my anger in a constructive way. As I learned to manage my emotions, my life slowly returned to normal. However, making love to Letty remained clumsy and awkward. My trust in her was still shattered. I treated the symptoms, but I knew I hadn't addressed the underlying issues. Letty supported my decision to arrange couples counseling with Meadow. When we began the sessions, Meadow asked us to share our goals. Surprisingly, my objectives were very different from Letty's. I said, "My goal is to overcome my anger and feelings of betrayal. I want to restore our trust to where it was before." When I returned home that day, Letty replied, "My goal is to understand if I'm just damn stupid." That was literally what she told the counselor. Meadow nearly exploded with laughter, her amusement so great that she couldn't speak for almost a minute. Once she regained her composure, she leaned forward and said, "Oh damn it, Letty, you made me laugh." She dashed into the bathroom to collect herself, which sent Letty and me into fits of laughter. It was therapeutic. For the first time in weeks, I felt relaxed around Letty and intertwined my fingers with hers. She beamed at me, her first genuine smile in what felt like forever. Meadow proved surprisingly effective in guiding us, but it was still a challenging journey. I often reflected on how much more difficult it would have been if Letty had made it to Teague's hotel room, even just for a few minutes. I frequently counted my lucky stars for catching her just before that happened. The first 3 sessions felt like we were walking in circles. The thing that gnawed at me the most was the fact that Letty seemed to be aroused by the idea of being intimately used by a man she claimed to despise. The thoughts that flooded my mind as I pondered this reaction pulled me into a very dark place. Letty repeatedly denied feeling any arousal, which drove me mad, especially because it was so painfully obvious to me. Meadow and I discussed this in our individual sessions, and she knew it was my primary issue. By the fourth session, Meadow had clearly had enough of Letty's denials. She skillfully coaxed her into admitting that she was, indeed, aroused. The moment Letty confessed, she burst into tears. Once she regained her composure, Meadow spent the rest of the session exploring how Letty's arousal affected me. For the first time, I think Letty truly understood the depth of my feelings and the self-doubt that consumed me. When she left that session, she was determined to help me understand her actions and regain my trust in myself. For the next month, sessions were held only between Letty and Meadow. When we returned to our couples counseling, Meadow surprised me with her first question. She repeated the terms of the bet and then asked if I would like to make the same deal with Letty someday. Looking directly at Letty, I said, "I'd love to make the same deal with you that T did, minus the illegal substances, of course. I want to try so many things with you, but you didn't allow me. You even refused to try something that you obviously liked. I would give anything to have you as my submissive, to do whatever I wanted with you, hell yes, all day, every day." Letty looked at me in shock and disbelief. "How is it possible that you don't even know how I feel about you?" I pressed. Her cheeks flushed a deep red as she stammered, "Andy, I come from a very conservative family." She fell silent, not finishing her thought. Meadow, noticing her discomfort, chimed in, "Letty, remember what we talked about? You need to be honest and frank. You should tell him about that phone call. He deserves to know." I waited patiently, anticipation building as I listened for what Letty would reveal. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her strength and began, "Not long before my mom left us, I came home early one day because my softball practice was canceled. When I returned, I heard my mother on the phone. She was talking openly about Not, and I thought she was speaking with Dad. I was shocked. It was a side of my parents I had never seen before. It both outraged and delighted me." I felt a lump forming in my throat as Letty continued. "A week later, my mother left us, and when I came home, I expected Dad to be at. But the words hung in the air, and the weight of her confession loomed large between us, a reminder of the tangled web we were trying to untangle. He had been called to the hospital, but I was the one who discovered the note she left on the kitchen table. It was addressed to my father, but I couldn't help but read it. In her letter, my mother laid bare her grievances. My father had never provided her with the standard of living she expected, nor had he satisfied her intimate needs. She was leaving for someone who could do both. Attached to the letter were divorce papers. It wasn't until later that I realized, during that phone call she wasn't speaking to my dad but to the man she had run away with. The realization hit me hard. It was a trauma I never truly got over, and it gave me a skewed perception of women and their desires. "I was shocked when I heard that story," I said, my mind racing back to my childhood. "But there's more to it. I have a very strong libido, Andy. I inherited that from my mother, I'm sure of it." Meadow, our consultant, had me take a survey, and according to my responses, my libido ranked at the top of the scale. She turned to me, excitement sparking in her eyes. "The results are in. Letty, you scored more than 2 standard deviations above the median. 95% of women have a self-rated libido lower than yours, higher than 97%, in fact." Letty nodded, her expression shifting as she opened up. "I've been masking and hiding this side of myself from you for years. I did it for 2 reasons. First, I was scared you'd see me as my mother, a dissolute woman whose desires overshadow loyalty to her family. Second, I was afraid to unleash the beast that lies within. I feared that if I indulged my passions, they would consume me. I suppressed those desires to maintain control." After a long, contemplative silence, Meadow encouraged her gently, "You need to continue, Letty. You need to talk about what you felt that day. Remember how much it hurt Andy during our last group session? You must be honest." Letty took a deep breath, and with surprising clarity, she continued, "After losing my last bet with Bowden, When both my virtue and my freedom were at stake, I thought I'd be terrified and paralyzed with fear. But instead, I found myself filled with this unexpected thrill. It had nothing to do with Bowden, he disgusts me. It wasn't about infidelity, either. I felt completely satisfied with you. What fascinated me was the idea of doing something I couldn't even admit to myself that I wanted. The prospect of being forced into a situation felt liberating, a release from guilt. It wasn't about cheating on you, it was about letting the beast out of its cage without the weight of guilt holding me down. I stared at her in bewilderment, trying to grasp the implications. Was she really saying she wanted to be forced into intimate acts just to escape guilt? It felt surreal, like something out of fiction. Meadow nodded knowingly. What you're describing is real, Letty. In psychology, we talk about the concept of paradoxical arousal, or reflexive intimate arousal. It refers to how a person can become sexually aroused by something that contradicts their conscious beliefs or desires. It may seem counterintuitive, but it's not uncommon. I found myself resisting. But that's just sophistry. She's making a choice here. Meadow cut in, gesturing dismissively as if I were a particularly dense student. Andy, you asked if it's real, not whether it makes sense or is logical. I know this sounds outrageous to you, but avoiding guilt by externalizing your locus of control is surprisingly common. It's believed that this might explain why submissive intimate relationships attract a significant portion of the population. I took a moment to process her words, then turned to Meadow. Do you believe Letty? Meadow responded, Letty and I have had extensive discussions about this, and I'm absolutely convinced she's being honest. I don't think she's hiding any ulterior motives beyond what she has expressed. Unfortunately, what I think doesn't matter, this is a decision you need to make for yourself. Letty watched me intently, concern etched across her face. She was waiting for my response. I glanced at Meadow, and she mirrored my confusion. Was there something I missed? Was there a question for me? I asked, trying to understand the dynamics at play. Meadow replied, for several sessions, you wanted Letty to explain why she felt so excited when she was preparing to meet Teague at the hotel. She just gave it to you. Do you accept her explanation? That's all. As Dad would say, these were essential details. Did I believe Letty and Meadow? I turned to Letty directly. When we got married, I promised you I would be faithful until the end of my days. Nobody forced me to make that promise, I chose to do it because I loved you. You were, and still are, incredibly attractive and desirable to me. I think we both got a little caught up in the excitement when I made that promise. I respected your desire to be a virgin on our wedding day, hoping our libidos would sync up perfectly. When I saw you let loose at times, allowing yourself to indulge in joy, I took it as a sign that we could share an intimate passion that matched mine. As I walked down the aisle, I was eager for a lifetime of adventures with you. When we finally made love, it was everything I had hoped for. You weren't shy, you loved the physical pleasure I gave you, and with every moment spent in bed, you made it clear that you loved me with your heart, body, and soul. But throughout our marriage, I felt you were hiding something from me. I had avoided doing the things I knew you would enjoy. You resisted trying new experiences, and I struggled to understand why. This uncertainty sparked self-doubt in me. The fact that you had a high libido didn't frighten me or make me insecure, rather, it brought me joy. What frustrated me was, I knew that Letty had a high libido, one she kept tightly under wraps, and it puzzled me why this was such a contentious point for us. I remembered my father-in-law's sermon before he left the ministry, where he emphasized that in a marriage, each partner's body belongs to the other. He quoted scripture, something about how spouses are meant to give control over their bodies to one another, keeping each other fulfilled to avoid temptations that could lead to infidelity. 1 Corinthians, Letty interjected, recalling the passage. Right, I replied. I'm no biblical scholar, but if I'm understanding your father correctly, God intended for married couples to find pleasure together as a consolation, as long as it's within the bounds of marriage. What happens behind closed doors, if consensual and not grotesque, shouldn't displease God. So, why are we avoiding this comfort we can find in each other? If letting me take the lead on our intimacy helps you feel less guilty, then I'm all in. I'll shoulder that blame, no questions asked. Hell, I'm ready for this all day, every day. I feel no fear, no disgust, no uncertainty about our intimacy. I just ask for honesty. We had made a commitment to be partners for life, and I believed I deserved the truth. The look on Letty's face suggested that I had hit the right chord, and a wave of passion surged through me. I turned my gaze to Meadow, gauging her reaction. She looked intrigued, clearly sensing that I was making my point. "Andy," Meadow said, "you still haven't answered the question. Do you accept her explanation?" I turned back to Letty. "Letty, with your explanation, you asked me to accept 3 things. First, you want me to admit that you had no desire or interest in spending the night with Bowden." As I spoke those words, I could see Letty's face tense. "I accept this unconditionally," I asserted, and relief washed over her. "Secondly," I continued, "you want me to accept that you were not disappointed in me, that you had no desire to cheat, and that you think I'm a great partner in bed." Again, her face tightened, but I held my ground. "I accept this unconditionally as well," I said, and her smile widened, a look of relief flooding her expression. "Lastly," I said, "you want me to agree that the reason you were turned on the day was that you were suppressing your libido, and the thought of being enslaved by a man who planned to use you sexually gave you a chance to feel that desire without guilt." She leaned forward, eyes sparkling as she anticipated my answer. "I can't agree with that," I replied firmly. "To me, that sounds like the ramblings of a psychopath." Horror flashed across Letty's face, her eyes widened, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Meadow looked worried and disappointed, equally alarmed by my words. I took a breath, letting my words linger. To agree with such a blatant claim without any evidence would make me a fool. What kind of fool do you think I am? I paused, letting my challenge sink in. Letty and Meadow exchanged deep breaths, clearly preparing to speak, but I cut them off. "What you claim can be verified. I need evidence, a demonstration to prove your point." Meadow burst into laughter, a sound so unexpected it startled both Letty and me. After a moment, Letty finally grasped what I was driving at. For nearly 30 minutes, Letty and I haggled back and forth. She made counteroffers, tried to lower the stakes, and even begged me. But I held my ground. "You were ready to give Teague 3 days, I insisted. "I want a whole year, 365 full days, to do whatever I want with you. I believe I am at least 120 times more important to you than Bowden. And honestly, I think I'm 12,200 times more important. So be grateful I'm not asking for 10 years. Letty frowned. "You're really underestimating yourself, Andy. But come on, you have to be reasonable." "Letty, the point of this exercise is to convince me that handing control over your intimacy to a man is a turn-on. If you keep negotiating to prevent me from taking control, you only weaken your argument." Meadow laughed again, clearly enjoying the banter. "So, what do you want? Do you want me to agree to 365 days under your control?" I asked Letty. "Do you guarantee me that, after that, you'll acknowledge I'm telling the truth?" "Let's be precise," I continued. "I want to use inductive reasoning to verify your claims. We'll make repeated observations under various conditions to look for consistent results. Your feelings about my authority will hinge on your obedience. If your words hold any truth, I expect to see 365 days of immediate and complete submission." Letty's mouth dropped open, her reaction not promising. I began to worry I'd overplayed my hand, risking a tactical victory for a strategic defeat. "How much time do I have to think about your proposal?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I'll give you 3 days to mull it over," I replied, and Meadow suggested we wrap up the session alone. When they left the office, I could sense Meadows' mischievous glee. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I asked as she looked at me like the Cheshire Cat. 3 days later, as I returned home from grocery shopping, I found Letty waiting for me at the kitchen table. She'd already had 2 glasses of Chardonnay and was carefully applying a bandage to her left wrist. "What happened?" I asked, noticing the bandage. With a sly grin, she peeled it off to reveal a small, neat tattoo in elegant script, "Jump or Die." "I want to do this for you," I said, feeling the weight of the promise I was about to make. "For the next 365 days, I'm yours, completely. I'll do whatever you want, without question, as long as it stays within the boundaries of our marriage. It's a ride or die situation for me. Nobody but you and me." She looked at me with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "This isn't disgusting?" I shook my head. "I told you a couple of nights ago that this goes without saying. You're mine, and I have no intention of sharing you." With a gleam in her eye, she raised her wrist. "Then it's settled. I ride or die." I couldn't help but smile as I got up and followed her into the bedroom. The thrill in the air was palpable, she was buzzing with excitement. Over the next year, not a single day passed without us exploring something new. Even when we were tired, irritated, or bogged down with responsibilities, we made it a point to keep our promise. She honored her commitment to never deny me anything, and I respected her feelings, making it easier for her along the way. In those first couple of months, we focused on helping Leigh embrace what she referred to as full access. Coming from a traditional and conservative background, it took her a little time to relax and open up to all the new things I wanted to try. We faced some psychological barriers, but the breakthrough moment came when we had an honest conversation afterward. That's when she realized she could embrace the loud, exhilarating sensations that came with our adventures. It was a turning point. Once she discovered that such pleasures were possible, she never held back again. Within 6 months, we had exhausted my entire wish list of desires. I threw everything I could think of at her, and to my surprise, when I admitted this to Leigh, she asked me to expand our boundaries even further. Eager for guidance, I turned to Meadow, a friend who had a wealth of experience in these matters. She did some research and provided me with a surprisingly comprehensive list of activities to explore, many of which I had never even heard of. My search history might have shocked even the most liberated French woman. Meadow also advised me to have Leigh do her own research. "Ask her to browse adult sites and send you links to stories that pique her interest," she suggested. So, I did just that. Leigh compiled a dozen ideas, and we were excited to dive into this new territory. When she shared her list with me, Meadow's advice echoed in my mind: what excites her, what she wants to do, and what she is ready to do are 3 different lists. Just because something turned her on didn't mean she wanted to act on it, and even if she did, that didn't guarantee she would follow through. I learned that many women have fantasies that they would never actually consider acting out. "Don't stare into the abyss trying to figure out why something turns her on," Meadow cautioned. "Just accept it and use it to please her. In the end, you are the one she really thinks about." Later that week, I gently encouraged Leigh to act out one of her fantasies. Afterward, she felt a pang of shame wash over her, worried I might think she was becoming one of those women who sought intimacy with other men. I reassured her by sharing Meadow's advice, admitting that I had no intention of digging deep into her psyche. "Considering what we just experienced, it's understandable that you'd feel that way," I said softly. It took time, but she began to trust me, and as a result, her walls came down. She started to discuss her desires more openly, using Meadow's list as a guide. We explored many things that most couples would never dare to consider. To our surprise, we enjoyed most of it and discovered some truly unexpected twists along the way. One day, I decided it was time to try something unconventional, something that would push the boundaries for both of us. I wasn't particularly fond of it, but Leigh was overjoyed. She trembled with excitement as she stretched out on the bed, her eyes sparkling. "Where does this come from?" "I don't think you could find another woman who enjoys it as much as I do," she joked, but soon her expression turned thoughtful. "I would never have done this without your encouragement, and look how I reacted. Do you understand what I was talking about in Meadows' office? Not feeling guilty allowed me to truly enjoy myself. I think I've finally justified myself." That year was nothing short of amazing. Our intimate relationship underwent a renaissance, blossomed like a rosebud opening to the sun. In situations where she once felt insecure, I often caught her absent-mindedly tracing the lines of her tattoo, drawing courage and determination from it. The intimate experiments and our daily explorations suited her perfectly. For the first time since we met, she didn't have a single failed week throughout the entire year. She became happier, less irritable, and much less anxious. Knowing that I loved everything about her and appreciated our connection significantly boosted her self-confidence. For me, daily intimacy was a revelation. I walked through life with a sense of ownership and pride, feeling as if I owned the very ground I walked on. At the gun shop, a lot of my work involved negotiation, but I found myself relaxing in interactions with customers. I stopped trying to project an image of the tough businessman I thought I needed to be. Instead, I focused on negotiating in good faith. When buyers saw that I was genuine and not trying to pull a fast one, they were more willing to agree to fair deals. The old adage rang true: confidence is key in negotiations. I became unstoppable at work. Financially, our store thrived, and I received 3 separate buyout offers from other businesses in the region. All were lucrative, but out of loyalty to my employees, I decided to stick with my business. I kept this information to myself, but somehow, it leaked out anyway. One afternoon, J.D. Butler, the county commissioner, walked into my store with a knowing look on his face. "Andy," he began, "I heard you turned down a buyout offer from J. Crown Tactical. Is that true?" I nodded, admitting it was true. "It's a lot of money, but I just couldn't bring myself to say yes. We love what we do here." J.D. smiled knowingly. "Sometimes, the heart knows better than the bank account, huh?" "Exactly," I replied, grateful for his understanding. That day, I felt more connected to my life, my marriage, and my work than ever before. Together, Leigh and I had built something beautiful, a life filled with trust, love, and endless possibilities. Mr. Butler looked me square in the eye, his expression serious. "This country, son, I don't think I could even use a crowbar to uproot L from here," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Honestly, when I found out you went to college in Atlanta, I didn't think you'd come back. I figured you'd disappear into the wilds of the city just like your brother and sister did. But here you are, surprising us all by returning home and clearly dedicating yourself to the future of the district. I'm proud of you, son." His words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. "That's why I wanted to come to you today, to talk frankly about the upcoming business deal JD has negotiated. He's planning to buy out the remaining businesses on Main Street and develop the area." I listened intently as Mr. Butler continued. "The old buildings along that street are magnificent brick structures, with huge windows and wooden floors that speak of a bygone era of prosperity. With just a little care, these buildings could remain magnificent for another 100 years." He paused for effect, looking out the window as if envisioning the future. "JD's son, Tyler, is returning home after working as a sous chef at a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Atlanta. He's tired of city life and his wife is pregnant, so he's decided to open a farm-to-table restaurant here in the county." I could see how this plan was starting to come together. Tyler wants to capitalize on the trend of day trippers coming from Augusta and Atlanta, looking for a taste of country life, Mr. Butler continued. "Lonnie, the owner of Lonnie's Barbecue, plans to move his restaurant 2 doors down from Tyler's and open a high-end coffee bakery and ice cream shop with his niece. The Howard family is looking to convert an old supermarket into a general store, offering everything for a nickel or a dime." JD had a vision for revitalizing the Main Street area, and it was starting to sound promising. He wants me to move my store to the old Farmers Bank building. Part of Uncle Kevin's store is a display of guns that conquered the West, and JD thinks that will give city dwellers something interesting and rustic to see while they wait for their tables. I was skeptical at first. One of the benefits of my current gun store was that I didn't have to pay rent or a mortgage on the building. But deep down, I knew the store's main weakness was its remote location. If we were in the city center with better parking, we would attract more visitors. JD's pitch was persuasive, especially after he took me through the old bank building. It was a solid stone structure that felt sturdy and timeless, built in an era long gone. The brass fittings and an antique cash register gave it an air of authenticity, while the huge storage unit from the 1930s still operated perfectly. The county took ownership of the bank due to non-payment of taxes, he explained. You can buy the building for the amount owed in taxes, but you have to agree to operate a store there for 10 years. The tax amount is only 30% of the assessed value of the building. After discussing it with Letty, my staff, and my siblings, I realized there was nothing wrong with the deal. My sister, who managed the family trust, even allowed me to borrow against her future share to help finance the purchase. I bought the bank building and moved my store there. In hindsight, it was the best business decision I've ever made. As part of what Meadow calls trust work, Letty and I had committed to being more open and transparent with each other about our thoughts and feelings, especially when away from home. Every evening, we'd go through a series of questions that encouraged us to share our secrets. It wasn't easy, but it helped us tackle the uncomfortable topics. On Black Friday, I decided to give everyone the day off so they could spend time with their families. I was alone in the store when an old school friend, Florence Benson, walked in to chat. Back in school, Florence was a skinny blonde, known for her insecurities. In high school, she was a rival for my affections with Letty, but she had transformed into a stunning woman, think Kate Hudson, with a friendly smile. We fell into easy conversation. Florence had attended Carnegie Mellon, studying musical theater, and I could see that she had matured during her first year, achieving considerable success. She had just finished a 2-year stint in the Broadway play Wicked, first as a swing performer and later as Glinda's understudy. Now, she had landed the role of Elphaba in the traveling production of Wicked and returned home for Thanksgiving, knowing she wouldn't see her family for a long time once she hit the road again. Around 4 o'clock, I invited Florence to dinner with Letty and me. To my surprise, she politely declined and suggested we have a private night together instead. I promised to be discreet, she said, assuring me that no one in the area would find out. I'll admit, the temptation was overwhelming. Florence was smart, talented, and beautiful, and her adult figure was simply breathtaking. Most importantly, her interest in me was incredibly flattering. She could have anyone she wanted. Her last boyfriend had been an outfielder for the New York Yankees, and yet here she was, wanting to reconnect with me. It took every ounce of willpower to politely decline her offer. I reminded myself that I would have to answer Letty's inevitable question about whether I had been tempted. After Florence left, I closed the store and drove straight home, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety as I immediately told Letty everything that had happened. To my surprise, instead of anger or jealousy, she was delighted by my refusal. "You made the right choice," she exclaimed, trying her best to convince me. But that week, Letty was relentless and insatiable. 4 months later, Letty returned home from a business trip to Atlanta. She had reviewed the ledgers with the external auditors and couldn't wait to share the news with me. Wade Banks, an account manager for the external audit group, approached me, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I could tell she had something important to say, and I braced myself for the implications of her news. As she spoke, I felt a mix of anticipation and unease, knowing that our lives were about to take another unexpected turn. Wade had been a close friend of Letty's for many years, and she often spoke highly of him. I had heard a lot about Wade, a strikingly handsome man who had recently lost his wife. Letty had tried to be a comforting friend for him during his difficult times. Over dinner during his last trip, Wade confessed that he was in love with her and asked if she would be the first woman he slept with since his wife passed away. Letty admitted, with a touch of shame, that she was very tempted by the idea. What drew her in was not just Wade's looks, but his kindness and sincere desire to heal and move forward in life. "It took all my willpower to say no," she told me. "I knew that when I got back, I'd have to face questions about whether I had been tempted. I wasn't going to lie about it, and that honesty helped me make the right choice." Inspired by her strength, I chose not to let jealousy or anger consume me. Instead, I decided to reward her for making such a tough decision. I pushed her that week, challenging her to let out her feelings, to open up about everything. The more we practiced being open about difficult topics, the easier it became. We learned to tackle temptation together instead of separately, and that honesty helped us heal from the aftermath of her argument with Teed. We grew closer than ever. In the midst of all this, I sold my father's vintage ski boat to VK. It only took one outing in June for him to become completely hooked. After that third weekend, I told him to just keep the boat at home. I had to admit, seeing my dad's old boat always brought a wave of sadness over me, so it felt like a relief to finally clear it out of my garage. VK, feeling guilty about using it so often, made a generous offer, and I used that money to plan a second honeymoon for Letty and me at Disney World. Letty had always dreamed of going there, and I can tell you this, for 8 glorious days in February, I witnessed firsthand why they call it the happiest place on earth. The year was winding down, and while I felt a tinge of sadness, I was overwhelmingly grateful for what we had experienced together. On our last night, we went to Atlanta for a fancy dinner to celebrate. I donned my best suit and tie, while Letty slipped into her stunning new little black dress, complete with fancy red lingerie underneath. Her new dress was even more breathtaking than the one she had ruined when she got sick at dinner months ago. As we waited for coffee and dessert, I tried to express just how much this year meant to me and how thankful I was for everything she had given me. I was finishing up my heartfelt speech when Letty pressed her fingers gently against my lips, silencing me. "Andy," she said softly, "what you allowed yourself to do this year was the biggest gamble of my life. You could have been cruel and made me miserable. You think you were lucky, but I can honestly say that I won my gamble. It paid off in spades." She clung to me, and I could smell the sweet aroma of peach pie lingering in the air. "What do you want to bet now?" she asked playfully. "So we can keep this going." "What do you think of our story so far?" I replied, enjoying the banter. Letty laughed. "What I liked most about it is that there are plenty of plot twists and turns. But when there are too many, it can become confusing, and you lose track of what the story is really about. What do you think?" "Leave a comment," I suggested with a grin. "I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the comments." In that moment, surrounded by laughter and a sense of renewal, I realized that our journey was just beginning, and I was excited to see where our story would take us next.